She tore her
Hold
own
still, it's
clothes to
bleeding bad.
bandage his
I know,
wounds,
just wrap it
gave
tight.
him her last piece
We
of
need to get
bread,
out of here.
stayed up
Help
all
me up.
night fighting his fever. For 7 days, she saved a stranger's life, a poor ranch hand named Eli. But Eli didn't exist. The man she saved, he was James Whitfield, the richest rancher in 3 territories. The same man who'd sent for her as a mail-order bride, then never showed up. He'd been testing her, every single day, watching to see if she'd be kind to a man with nothing. And she had no idea. What happens when she discovers the truth? Before we dive into this story, hit that subscribe button, drop a like and comment where you're watching from right now. Let's see how far this story travels. It all started with 47 words in a newspaper and a woman who had nothing left to lose. Thunder cracked across Saddleback Canyon like a rifle shot, splitting the June sky in two. Cole Whitfield had maybe 3 seconds to react. 3 seconds between life and death, between the man he was and the man he was about to become. The sound came first, a deep grinding roar that started high up the canyon wall where ancient red stone had been waiting decades to fall. Then the shadow, a darkness spreading across the late afternoon sun as tons of granite broke free and began their violent descent. Cole's horse, a steady chestnut mare named Copper, screamed, that high-pitched whinny of pure animal terror. She reared front hooves, clawing at empty air, and Cole felt himself sliding backward in the saddle. His boots lost the stirrups. His hands lost the reins. For one weightless moment, he was suspended between earth and sky, watching the rock slide come down like God's own hammer. He hit the ground hard, shoulder first, then hip, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The world became a chaos of sound and dust and flying stone. Cole rolled, covered his head with both arms and prayed. Not eloquent prayers, just the desperate or wordless plea of a man who suddenly understood how small he was, how fragile, how easily the world could erase him. Something struck his head. White light exploded behind its eyes, then darkness swallowed everything. In that darkness, drowning in pain and the taste of blood, Cole Whitfield's last conscious thought was about a woman he'd never met. A woman he'd sent for, then abandoned at a train station because he was too much of a coward to trust her. This is how it ends, he thought. After everything I survived, after all my careful plans, dying alone in a canyon because I was too scared to believe in second chances. Then even thought stopped, and there was only black. The morning of June 14th, 1882 began with doubt. Cole stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom at Diamond Star Ranch, struggling with a cravat he hadn't worn in 3 years. His fingers, usually so steady with a rope or a rifle, trembled against the silk. The face looking back at him from the glass was lean and weathered, 32 years, written in the lines around his eyes and mouth. Gray eyes that had seen too much. A jaw that stayed clenched even when he tried to relax it. Behind him, reflected in the mirror's silvered surface, his bedroom told the story of a solitary man. A wide bed, military corners, on the blankets not a wrinkle to be seen. A single chair, a dresser with nothing on top but a lamp and a photograph he kept face down. The room of someone who'd taught himself not to need comfort, not to expect softness, not to trust in anything that could be taken away. You planning to strangle yourself with that thing, or you want some help? Thomas Dawson stood in the doorway, 65 years old and straight-backed, as the day he'd mustered out of the Union Army 20 years prior. White hair, weathered face, and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been Cole's father's foreman, then Cole's, and somewhere along the way had become the closest thing to family Cole had left. "I've got it," Cole said, but his fingers betrayed him again, fumbling the knot. Dawson crossed the room with the bow-legged gait of a man who'd spent 60 years in the saddle. He took over the cravat with practiced efficiency, his scarred hands moving with surprising gentleness. A bullet scar marked his left shoulder. Gettysburg, 1863. He never talked about it, but sometimes on cold mornings, Cole saw him favor that arm. "You sure about this?" Dawson asked quietly. Cole knew what he meant, not the cravat, not the trip to Thornfield Station. The whole plan, the test, the deception he'd carefully constructed over the past 3 months of letters. "I'm sure," Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Because once you start lying to this woman, it's going to be mighty hard to stop." Cole's jaw tightened. "I'm not lying. I'm just not telling her everything right away. That's called lying where I come from. She could be another Catherine. The name hung in the air between them like smoke. Catherine. Beautiful, charming Catherine with her sweet smile and sweeter lies. Catherine who'd taken $2,000 in Cole's ability to trust anyone and left them both bleeding out in an Abilene saloon. Dawson finished the cravat and stepped back. This Grace Hartwell, her letters don't read like Catherine's did. Catherine's letters were perfect too. That was the whole point. Catherine's letters were full of flattery and pretty words. This woman writes plain, honest, like she's trying to tell you who she really is, not who she thinks you want her to be. Cole had read Grace's 3 letters so many times he'd memorized every word. The first one responding to his advertisement had been brief and direct. I am 24 years old. My mother recently passed. I worked 7 years at Wilson's Laundry in St. Louis. I know hard work. I am not afraid of it. If you are looking for beauty or refinement, I am not your choice. If you want honesty and loyalty, perhaps I am. The second letter after he'd responded had told him about her mother, a woman who'd served as a battlefield nurse during the war, who'd learned medicine from necessity and taught it to her daughter, who died of consumption after 3 months of slow suffering, leaving Grace with nothing but a notebook full of herbal remedies and a brass watch that had belonged to Grace's grandmother. The third letter, the one that had made Cole send the train ticket, had been just 4 sentences. You asked what I want from marriage. I want a place where I belong. I want to matter to someone. That is all. Simple words, true words if she meant them. But Catherine had seemed true too at first. I need to know, Cole said, meeting Dawson's eyes in the mirror. If Grace Hartwell is coming here because she wants a husband or because she wants the biggest ranch in Wyoming territory, I need to know if she'll care for a man with nothing or only for James Whitfield, who owns 50,000 acres. So you're going to pretend to be poor. I'm going to let her think I'm a ranch hand, someone she found by chance. If she shows kindness to a man with nothing, then I'll know she's real. If she doesn't, Cole's voice trailed off, and if she figures out you're lying, if she finds out you tested her like she was livestock at auction, then I'll deal with that when it happens. Dawson shook his head slowly. You're playing a dangerous game, son. Lies have a way of growing. You start with a small one, tell yourself it's for a good reason, and before you know it, you're buried so deep you can't find your way back to the truth. I'll tell her, Cole insisted. Once I'm sure, once I know she's different from Catherine, I'll tell her everything, assuming she doesn't hate you for lying in the first place. Cole turned away from the mirror, adjusted his vest, checked his pocket watch. 8:30. The train from St. Louis would arrive at Thornfield Station at 3 in the afternoon. It was a 4-hour ride. He needed to leave soon. Maybe she won't understand, he said quietly. Maybe she'll be angry. But at least I'll know the truth. At least I won't wake up 6 weeks into a marriage and discover I've been played for a fool again. Dawson studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sound of a man who'd fought too many losing battles to waste energy on one more. Your father would have handled this different. My father trusted everyone. Look where that got him. Your father died happy, surrounded by people who loved him. You're going to die rich and alone if you keep this up. The words hit harder than Dawson probably intended. Cole felt them land somewhere in his chest, in that hollow space where trust used to live before Catherine carved it out. I'll be back by evening, he said, ending the conversation. With my bride, or without her. Either way, I'll know. He walked out of the room, down the wide staircase through the house his grandfather had built in 1865, when Wyoming was still a territory and Diamond Star was just 5,000 acres of hope and hard work. Now it was an empire, 50,000 acres, 10,000 head of cattle, 30 permanent hands, and twice that during roundup season. The kind of wealth that made men stare and women calculate. The kind of wealth that made it impossible to know if someone wanted you or just wanted what you owned. Cole saddled Copper himself, waving off the stable hand who tried to help. The familiar motion steadied him. Bridle first, then saddle blanket, then the saddle itself, checking the girth twice, because a loose cinch could kill you as sure as a rattlesnake. His father had taught him that. His father had taught him a lot of things, including how to trust people. His father had been wrong about that last part. The ride to Thornfield took him through the heart of Diamond Star Land. Mile after mile of grassland rolling toward distant mountains dotted with cattle that bore his brand. He passed 3 line shacks, waved to half a dozen hands working fence line and water tanks. They all touched their hat brims, called him Mr. Whitfield, or boss, their respect automatic and unquestioned. This was what he'd built, what 3 generations of Whitfields had built: land and cattle and reputation, a legacy that meant something, a name that carried weight. And somewhere in St. Louis, a woman named Grace Hartwell was boarding a train believing she was coming to marry a man who valued honesty above all else. Cole's stomach twisted. He pushed the guilt down, buried it under layers of justification. This wasn't cruelty. This was protection, self-preservation, a reasonable test to avoid making the same mistake twice. He almost believed it. By noon, he'd reached the narrowest part of his property where Diamond Star Land pinched down to a strip only 2 miles wide. Saddleback Canyon cut through here, a shortcut that would save an hour off the trip to Thornfield. The canyon walls rose 200 feet on either side, red sandstone sculpted by wind and water into fantastic shapes. A creek ran along the bottom, cool and clear, lined with cottonwoods that provided the only shade for miles. Cole had ridden through Saddleback 100 times. He knew every twist and turn, every place where the walls narrowed, and every spot where rockfall had left debris across the trail. He knew to watch for loose stone after heavy rain, knew to listen for the grinding sound that meant something was shifting up above. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that a winter of freeze and thaw had opened a crack in the canyon wall 50 feet up. That spring runoff had widened the crack. That the weight of centuries of stone was balanced on a weakness no bigger than a man's hand. That all it would take was one more cold night, one more hot day, one more cycle of expansion and contraction, and physics would do what physics always did. He was halfway through the canyon when it happened. Grace Hartwell stood in the doorway of the boarding house room that had been home for 7 years and tried to remember what hope felt like. The room was small, 10 feet by 12, a narrow bed with a lumpy mattress, a chair with one wobbly leg, a dresser with a cracked mirror that made her face look fractured, broken into pieces that didn't quite fit together. The window had been broken for 3 months. She'd stuffed rags in the gap to keep out the cold, but rain still got through, leaving water stains on the sill that would never come out. This was what 7 years of honest labor had bought her. This room, these 4 walls, this view of a brick alley where rats fought over garbage and drunks slept off their whiskey. Her mother had died in this room, died coughing blood into rags that Grace had to boil clean every night because they couldn't afford to keep buying new ones. Died apologizing for being a burden, for not being strong enough to keep working, for leaving Grace alone in a world that had no mercy for women, without men or money to protect them. Grace had held her mother's hand at the end and promised she wouldn't let the world make her hard, wouldn't let bitterness take root, would remember that soft hearts change things even when everything seemed hopeless. She'd kept that promise for 7 years. 7 years of washing other people's clothes at Wilson's Laundry. 7 years of pretending not to notice when Mr. Wilson let his hand linger on her shoulder, when his eyes followed her across the room, when he stood too close and breathed whiskey breath on her neck. 7 years of saving pennies and nickels, hiding them in a sock, stuffed into the mattress, dreaming of something better, but never quite believing it would come. Then 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Mr. Wilson had cornered her in the back room where they hung the wet laundry, grabbed her wrist, pulled her close, said things that made her skin crawl. A pretty girl like you could have it easy here, if you're smart, if you know how to be grateful. Grace had slapped him, hard enough to leave a red mark on his cheek, hard enough that her palm stung for an hour afterward. Then she'd walked out, quit her job, burned that bridge to ash, and walked away without looking back. That night, sitting in her room with $4 to her name and no prospects, she'd found the newspaper someone had left on the bench downstairs. The Missouri Gazette, 3 days old, yellowed pages smelling of tobacco and beer. She'd almost thrown it away. Instead, she'd opened it. And there in the back section where desperate people advertised desperate things, she'd found 47 words that changed everything. Rancher seeks companion, must value hard work over appearances. Wyoming territory, good land, sturdy house, need of someone honest and loyal. If willing to take a chance on a stranger, write to James Whitfield, Diamond Star Ranch, care of Thornfield Station. Grace had read those words 10 times, 20, trying to find the trap, the lie, the catch that had to be hiding somewhere in the simple sentences. But the more she read, the more she thought about her empty room and her empty future and her promise to her mother about soft hearts, the more it seemed like maybe this was a chance. Maybe the only chance she'd get. She'd written that night, by candlelight with ink that cost her 10 cents she couldn't afford, trying to be honest without being pathetic, trying to tell this stranger who she was without sounding like she was begging for mercy. I am 24 years old. My mother recently passed. I worked 7 years at Wilson's Laundry in St. Louis. I know hard work. I am not afraid of it. If you are looking for beauty or refinement, I am not your choice. If you want honesty and loyalty, perhaps I am. She'd mailed it the next morning using her last stamp. Then she'd waited 1 week, 2, telling herself he wouldn't respond, that men like him probably got 100 letters from desperate women, that she was foolish to hope. The response came on day 16. A single page written in careful script. Miss Hartwell, your letter stood out because you did not flatter or make promises you cannot keep. I appreciate honesty. I have land, a house, and a life I would like to share with someone who values simple things. If you are willing, tell me more about yourself. What shaped you? What do you hope for? Grace had written back that night. Told him about her mother, about the herbs and remedies she'd learned, about the boarding house and the laundry and the view of the alley where nothing good ever happened, about wanting a place where she belonged, where she mattered to someone. His second letter came faster. Told her about the ranch, though not how big it was, about Wyoming's big sky and cold winters, about needing someone to share the burden of a large property, about being 32 and alone and tired of eating supper by himself. The third letter came with a train ticket. I believe we might suit each other, Miss Hartwell. The ticket is for June 11th. The train arrives at Thornfield Station on June 14th at 3 o'clock. I will meet you there. If you decide this is not for you, the return ticket is included. No obligations, just a chance to see if 47 words might be the beginning of something real. Grace had held that ticket in her trembling hands and cried. Not sad tears. Something else. Something that felt almost like hope. Now 3 days later, she stood in her empty room with everything she owned packed into a single bag. 2 dresses, the wool shawl her mother had knitted, undergarments mended so many times they were more thread than original cloth, 6 pieces of cornbread wrapped in the same cotton cloth her mother had used for Sunday baking, 6 dried apples, her mother's journal leather-bound filled with careful notes about which plants healed which ailments, and the watch, her grandmother's watch, then her mother's, now hers, the only thing of value she owned. Gold-plated, though the plating was wearing thin, it kept perfect time. Every night Grace wound it the way her mother had taught her. Keep moving forward, Grace girl. The Lord helps those who help themselves. She picked up her bag, took one last look at the room, at the water-stained window, at the cracked mirror that made her face look broken, at 7 years of her life compressed into 4 walls and 100 bad memories. Then she walked out and didn't look back. Grace Hartwell had been traveling for 3 days when she stepped off the train at Thornfield Station, and the first thing she thought was how empty the sky looked. In St. Louis, buildings blocked the view. Smoke from factories and homes and steamboats turned the air gray and thick. You could live your whole life there and never really see the sky, not all of it, not edge to edge like a blue bowl turned upside down over the world. Here there was nothing but sky. Blue so deep it hurt to look at, not a cloud anywhere. Just endless open space that made her feel simultaneously free and terrifyingly small. The second thing she thought was that nobody was coming. The platform was empty except for the station master, an old man with tobacco-stained fingers and a face like dried leather. He squinted at her ticket, then at the letter she handed him, then back at her with an expression that might have been pity. James Whitfield, he read aloud. You're here to meet James Whitfield. Yes, sir. He was supposed to be here at 3 o'clock. The letter said June 14th. Grace pulled out her mother's brass watch, checked it for the 100th time. 3:15. The train had been exactly on schedule. Well, ma'am, I know who James Whitfield is. Everybody in these parts knows the Whitfield name. Owns Diamond Star Ranch. Biggest spread between here and the territorial line. Grace's stomach dropped. How big? 50,000 acres. Maybe more by now. Richest man in 3 territories. The words hit like a slap. 50,000 acres. The advertisement in the Missouri Gazette had said rancher seeks companion. Not richest man in 3 territories, seeks mail-order bride. The letters had mentioned land, a house, a need for someone to share his life. But this was something else entirely. He never mentioned, Grace said quietly. I didn't know he was rich, the station master shrugged. Strange he'd send for a bride, then not show up to collect her. You sure you got the right day? Grace unfolded the letter again. Read the date for the 100th time. June 14th. Today was June 14th. She pulled out the watch one more time, as if looking at it again might change the date somehow. The last link to a family that was gone. I'm sure, she said. The station master handed back her letter. Could be he got held up. Ranch work don't keep no schedule. Could be tomorrow. Could be next week. Next train east comes through Thursday. You could wait here. Send word to the ranch. Grace looked around the platform. A single bench weathered gray by sun and wind. A water barrel with a rusty dipper. The station house itself barely bigger than the boarding house room she'd left behind in St. Louis. No hotel in sight. No town for that matter. Just the station and the empty land and that impossible sky. She'd spent every penny she had on necessities for the journey. She had $6 in her pocket, the cornbread wrapped in cloth, and 6 dried apples in her bag. That was it. That was everything she owned in the world besides the clothes on her back and her mother's herb journal. Wait until Thursday. 4 days of sitting on this platform watching trains come and go, hoping a man who hadn't bothered to meet her once might bother to meet her a second time. How far to the nearest town, she asked. The station master blinked. Crestwood's about 10 miles west. But ma'am, it'll be dark in 4 hours, and that road ain't safe for a woman alone. Is there a shortcut? His eyebrows climbed toward his hat. There's a path through Saddleback Canyon. Cuts 3 miles off the journey. But I wouldn't recommend it. Why not? Canyon's narrow, gets dark early, and the walls are unstable. Rock slides happen. Not often, but when they do, he shook his head. Better to stick to the main road. Even if it takes longer. Grace looked west where the sun was already starting its slow fall toward the horizon. 4 hours of daylight left. 7 miles through a canyon versus 10 miles on a road. The choice seemed obvious. Thank you for your help, she said, picking up her bag. Ma'am, the station master's voice stopped her at the edge of the platform. You sure about this? You could wait right here, safe and sound. Grace thought about the boarding house in St. Louis. About Mr. Wilson at the laundry, the way his hand had lingered on her shoulder, the way his smile had made her skin crawl. About the room with the broken window. She couldn't afford to fix the roof that leaked when it rained, the neighbors who screamed at each other until 3 in the morning. She'd burn that life down. Quit her job, spent her last savings on this journey, put her faith in 47 words from a stranger. There was no going back. Only forward. I've done enough waiting, she said. Which way to the canyon? The path into Saddleback Canyon was clear enough at first. Well-worn dirt marked by wagon wheels and hoof prints. It followed a creek that ran clear and cold over smooth stones lined with cottonwoods, whose leaves whispered in the breeze. Pretty in its way. Peaceful. That lasted about 20 minutes. Then the canyon walls started to close in. The path narrowed, hemmed in by red stone that rose higher and higher on both sides until Grace had to crane her neck back to see the sky. The air grew cooler, trapped between the walls, and shadows stretched long and dark across the ground. Her bag grew heavier with every step. 20 pounds of everything she owned. The leather handle worn smooth from her mother's hands, then hers cut into her palm. She switched hands every few minutes, but it didn't help much. The weight was the weight, and there was no escaping it. Grace had been walking for maybe an hour when she first started wondering if this was a mistake. The sun was lower now, the shadows deeper, and she hadn't seen another soul since leaving the station. No wagon tracks this far in, no hoof prints, just her own footsteps in the endless whisper of the creek. What kind of man sends for a bride, then doesn't show up? The question had been circling her mind since she stepped off the train. Now it came back with new force. A rich man, the richest man in 3 territories. A man who owned 50,000 acres and could have any woman he wanted. Why would someone like that need to advertise for a mail-order bride? Grace's mother had always said she had good instincts about people, that she could read faces, see through lies, spot a fraud at 20 paces. But her mother had also died in a boarding house room that smelled like carbolic and despair. Coughing blood into rags Grace had to boil clean every night. Good instincts didn't keep you safe. They didn't put food on the table or pay the rent. Sometimes all they did was show you how bad your options were. The canyon grew darker. The walls seemed to lean inward, blocking more and more of the sky. Grace's footsteps echoed off the stone, coming back to her like whispered warnings. Turn back. This is foolish. You're going to die out here alone, and nobody will ever know what happened to you. She pushed the thoughts away, kept walking, one foot in front of the other. That's what her mother had always said. When things get hard, you just keep moving. Put one foot in front of the other, and eventually you'll get where you're going. The horse appeared around a bend in the path like a ghost. Grace froze. Her hand tightened on her bag, as if 20 pounds of cloth and cornbread would somehow protect her. But there was no rider. The horse, a tall chestnut with a white blaze on its forehead, stood in the middle of the trail, reins trailing in the dust. Alone. The animal's sides were heaving. Foam crusted its neck. And there on the saddle, darkening the leather. Blood. Fresh blood. Still tacky to the touch when Grace reached out with trembling fingers. Someone had been riding this horse, recently. Hard. And whatever had happened to them, it wasn't good. Grace looked around suddenly, aware of how alone she was, how vulnerable. The canyon walls rose on either side, trapping her. The shadows were deep now, hiding things. Anything could be out there, anyone. She should run, get on the horse, ride to town, find help, let someone else deal with whatever horror had left blood on that saddle. But then she saw the trail, scuff marks in the dust, displaced stones, a path of destruction leading around a tumble of boulders toward a section of the canyon wall where fresh rockfall had spilled across the trail. Recent, very recent. The dust still hung in the air, catching the fading light. When you see someone in need, Grace girl, you don't walk past. That's not who we are. Her mother's voice clear as Sunday church bells. The same voice that had taught her which plants healed wounds and which ones caused fever. The same voice that had made her promise not to let the world make her hard. Grace set down her bag, took a deep breath, started toward the rockfall. The boulders were sharp-edged and treacherous. Some were small as her fist, others large as water barrels. They'd come down from high up. She could see the fresh scar on the canyon wall, pale stone exposed where the rock face had sheared away. She climbed over the first boulder, then the second. Her dress caught on sharp edges, tore. She didn't stop. Something was pulling her forward now. Some instinct stronger than fear. Then she saw the hand. It jutted out from beneath a slab of granite, fingers curled toward the sky. Motionless, a man's hand. Broad palm, work-roughened fingers. A simple silver ring on the third finger engraved with letters she couldn't make out from this distance. Grace's breath caught. For one frozen moment, she stood on top of that boulder, looking down at that hand, and every survival instinct she had screamed at her to run. Then the fingers twitched. She was moving before she could think about it, scrambling down the rocks, heedless of the sharp edges that tore at her dress and scraped her palms. The man lay on his side, half buried under the slide. His face was turned away from her, but she could see his chest moving, shallow breaths, labored. But there, he was alive. Grace knelt beside the buried man and tried to remember everything her mother had taught her about saving lives. Stop the bleeding first. That was always first. She could see blood matting his dark hair, seeping from a gash across his forehead. Deep, bad, but not arterial, not spurting. He wouldn't bleed out in the next few minutes. Second, clear the airway. Make sure he could breathe. She leaned close, heard the rasp of air moving in and out of his lungs. Labored, but steady enough. Third, assess the damage. Figure out what was broken, what was trapped, what needed immediate attention. His left leg was pinned beneath a flat slab of granite. The stone had to weigh 200 pounds, maybe more. Too heavy for Grace to move by herself. But she had to try because leaving him pinned meant the weight would cut off circulation, and cutting off circulation meant tissue death, and tissue death meant amputation or worse. Grace positioned herself at the edge of the slab, braced her shoulder against the rough stone, took a deep breath and pushed. Nothing. The rock didn't budge. She tried again, put every ounce of strength she had into it. Her boots scraped against loose gravel, searching for purchase. Her back screamed in protest. The stone shifted. Maybe an inch. Not enough. Grace stepped back, breathing hard, and looked around for something to use as leverage. A branch, a piece of wood, anything. There, a cottonwood branch thick as her wrist half buried in the rockfall. She pulled it free, wedged one end under the slab, and used it as a pry bar. The physics worked better this time. The branch gave her leverage, multiplied her strength. She leaned on it with all her weight, and the slab shifted. 2 inches. 3. The man's leg came free with a scraping sound that made Grace's stomach turn. She let the rock fall back and dropped the branch, hands shaking. Her palms were raw and bleeding. She'd torn 2 fingernails down to the quick. It didn't matter. The man was free. Grace turned her attention to his injuries. The head wound first. She needed water, clean cloth, something to stop the bleeding. The horse. The horse would have supplies. Grace ran back to where the animal stood still, trembling but calmer now. She found a canteen hanging from the saddle horn. Unscrewed the cap with shaking fingers. The water inside was warm but clean. She tore a strip from her petticoat. The cotton was thin, worn from 7 years of washing, but it was clean. She'd washed it herself just 3 days ago, getting ready for this journey. Back to the man. Grace poured water over the wound, washing away blood and dirt. The gash was deep down to the bone in places. It would need stitching. But first it needed to be clean. She worked methodically the way her mother had taught her. Small amounts of water, gentle pressure, clear away the debris without making the bleeding worse. The sun was lower now, the light fading, but she had enough to see by, enough to do what needed doing. The man groaned. His eyes fluttered, but didn't open. "Hold on," Grace said. She wasn't sure if he could hear her, wasn't sure if talking helped. But her mother had always talked to her patients, even the unconscious ones, said it gave them something to hold on to. A voice in the darkness. "I'm getting you out of here," Grace continued. "You're going to be fine. Just hold on." She finished cleaning the wound as best she could, tore another strip from her petticoat and wrapped it around his head, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Then she turned her attention to his leg. The ankle was already swelling. She could see it through the torn fabric of his pants. Purple bruising spreading up from the boot. She needed to feel the bone check for breaks. Grace ran her fingers along his calf, feeling for abnormalities. The man groaned again, louder this time. His eyes opened, gray eyes unfocused and confused. "Who?" His voice was a harsh whisper. "Who are you?" "Someone who found you," Grace said. "Don't try to move. Your leg is hurt." "Where?" "Saddleback Canyon. There was a rock slide. Do you remember?" His eyes drifted closed, opened again with visible effort. "Cabin," he managed. "Half-mile. Creek. There's a cabin. Follow creek, half-mile." His eyes rolled back and he went limp. Grace sat back on her heels and looked around. The sun was touching the canyon rim now. Maybe an hour of light left. Half a mile to a cabin following the creek. With an unconscious man who outweighed her by at least 60 pounds. The smart thing would be to make him comfortable, ride to town, bring back help. But the bleeding, the head wound, the way his skin was already starting to feel clammy despite the warmth of the day. These were signs of shock, of a body starting to shut down. If she left him here, even for the few hours it would take to get help, he might not survive. Grace looked at the horse, looked at the man, looked at the impossible task in front of her. Then she stood up, wiped her bloody hands on her already ruined dress, and got to work. Getting Cole onto the horse took Grace 20 minutes and nearly broke her. She tried everything, dragging him by his shoulders, but his dead weight was too much, and she couldn't get him more than a few feet. Trying to wake him enough to help, but he was too far gone, mumbling words she couldn't understand. Finally, she positioned the horse next to a large boulder, climbed up on the rock, and used it as a step to maneuver his upper body across the saddle. His legs hung down on one side, his arms on the other. It wasn't dignified. It probably wasn't even safe. But it was the best she could do. Grace took the reins and started walking. The creek led her through the canyon as the light failed. One step, then another. The horse followed docilely as if it understood the urgency. The man draped across the saddle, groaned occasionally, but didn't wake. Grace's legs burned. Her back ached. Her hands, raw and bleeding, screamed every time she gripped the reins. She ignored all of it, focused on the sound of the creek, on putting one foot in front of the other, on the promise she'd made to her mother about soft hearts and not walking past people who needed help. The cabin appeared between one step and the next, a dark shape against darker trees. Single room, stone chimney, door hanging crooked on its hinges, empty, abandoned. But it had walls and a roof, and that was enough. Grace pushed open the door with her shoulder. The hinges shrieked. Inside darkness and the smell of old smoke and mouse droppings. She felt along the mantel until her fingers found a candle stub and a box of matches. The match flared. The candle caught. Weak light pushed back the darkness just enough to see. Stone fireplace. Wooden cot with a straw mattress. Table. Two chairs. One pot hanging over the dead fire. The basic necessities of survival and nothing more. Grace went back outside. Getting the man off the horse and into the cabin took another 10 minutes. She half dragged, half carried him through the door, across the packed dirt floor and onto the cot. By the time she lowered him down, her arms were shaking so badly she could barely control them. She stepped back, breathing hard, and looked at what she'd accomplished. One unconscious man, one abandoned cabin, one very frightened woman who had no idea what she was doing, and night falling fast outside. Grace touched the watch in her pocket, felt its familiar weight, thought about her mother who'd saved lives in field hospitals during the war, who'd taught her daughter that knowledge was power and that paying attention to details could mean the difference between life and death. She could do this. She had to do this. Grace went to work. Fire first. She found kindling beside the fireplace, dry sticks left by whoever had lived here last, built a small pile in the hearth, crumpled dry leaves for tinder. The match caught on the second try. Smoke curled up, then flame. Heat began to spread through the cabin. Water next. Grace took the copper pot outside, filled it from the creek. The water was cold and clear, probably safe to drink. She set it on the fire to warm. While the water heated, she examined her patient more carefully. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but it was deep and would likely scar. The ankle was badly sprained, possibly worse. His skin felt hot to the touch, fever starting. Grace tore more strips from her petticoat, dipped them in the warming water, cleaned the wound again more thoroughly this time. The man flinched in his sleep, but didn't wake. She needed herbs. Mugwort for the wound, yarrow for the fever. Her mother had taught her to recognize them, had made Grace practice until she could identify dozens of plants by sight and smell alone. Grace took the candle and went back outside. The creek bank in the darkness was treacherous, but she moved carefully, testing each step. Her mother's voice in her head, patient and clear. Mugwort has silver-green leaves. Soft, almost furry. It grows near water. Yarrow has white flowers in flat clusters. Both common, both powerful. She found the mugwort first. A thick patch growing right at the water's edge, leaves catching the candlelight. She gathered handfuls, stuffed them into her pockets. The yarrow took longer, but she found it growing further up the bank. Back inside, Grace found a wooden bowl in the cabin, cracked but usable. A smooth river stone for a pestle. She crushed the mugwort leaves, releasing their sharp medicinal smell. The smell of her mother's kitchen. The smell of healing. She packed the crushed leaves against the head wound, bound them with clean cloth. Then she turned to the yarrow. Crushed it, mixed it with warm water in a tin cup she found on a shelf. "Here," she said, lifting the man's head. "You need to drink this." He swallowed reflexively. Some of the liquid went down. Some ran down his chin. It was enough. Grace eased him back onto the cot, covered him with a moth-eaten blanket she found folded in the corner, added wood to the fire. Then she sat down on the floor with her back against the wall and let herself feel for just a moment how tired she was. 72 hours ago, she'd been in St. Louis, packing her bag, burning bridges, betting everything on 47 words and a train ticket. Now she was in an abandoned cabin in Wyoming territory, caring for a man she didn't know, with no money and no way to get help. Grace pulled out the watch, checked the time. 8:30. She wound it carefully the way her mother had taught her. "Keep moving forward, Grace girl." The man on the cot groaned, muttered something. Grace listened. "Catherine," he said, the word thick with pain. "Can't trust." Grace frowned. Who was Catherine? "Everything I built," he mumbled. "She took everything." Then he fell silent again, lost in fever dreams. Grace sat in the firelight and wondered what kind of man she'd saved. what kind of story he carried. What secrets would come spilling out when he finally woke? Outside, the Wyoming night settled over Saddleback Canyon. Cold and dark and full of stars Grace couldn't see from inside the cabin walls. Inside, a fire burned. A man fought fever. And a woman who had come west looking for a new life found herself doing what she'd always done, taking care of someone else, asking nothing in return, hoping it would be enough. The fever peaked near midnight. Grace had dozed off her head against the wall when the man's thrashing woke her. He was burning up skin hot enough to hurt when she touched him, shaking with chills despite the fire, calling out words she couldn't quite understand. She worked through the night, changed the poultice, bathed his face and neck with cool water, forced more yarrow tea between his lips, added wood to the fire when it burned low. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, she ran out of clean cloth. She tore another strip from her petticoat, then another until there was barely anything left. She'd be scandalous when she finally stood up, but that didn't matter. Modesty was for people who had the luxury of caring about such things. By 4, she'd used up all her cornbread and 2 of the dried apples. She was desperately hungry, but the remaining food had to last. She didn't know how long they'd be here, didn't know when help might come, or if it would come at all. Around 5, as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the gaps in the cabin walls, the fever broke. Grace felt it happen. One moment his skin was burning, the next cooler. Still warm, but no longer dangerously hot. His breathing steadied. The thrashing stopped. She sat back exhausted and let the tears come. Not sad tears. Relief. The overwhelming relief of having fought something terrible and won. The man slept peacefully for the first time since she'd found him. Grace added the last of the wood to the fire, wrapped herself in the other moth-eaten blanket, and finally let herself rest. She woke to sunlight and the sound of a voice. "Where am I?" Grace jerked upright. Her neck screamed in protest, stiff from sleeping at an odd angle. The man on the cot was awake, looking around the cabin with confused gray eyes. "Safe," Grace said, her voice rough from disuse. "A cabin by the creek. You told me about it before you passed out." He turned his head to look at her, really look at her, taking in her torn dress, her bleeding hands, the strips of cloth drying by the fire that had clearly come from her undergarments. "You did all this," he said, not a question, a statement of fact. Grace didn't answer. "What was there to say? Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who was walking through that canyon." Grace stood wincing as her muscles protested. She poured water from the pot into the tin cup. "Your turn. Who are you?" She watched his face as she asked, saw something flicker in his eyes. Calculation, maybe. Or fear. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Eli," he said. "Name's Eli." Grace handed him the water, watched his eyes as he said the name, watched them slide away from hers just for a heartbeat, just long enough to tell her he was lying. She didn't call him on it, not yet. The man, whoever he really was, had just survived a rock slide and a fever that could have killed him. He was weak, vulnerable, maybe scared. People lied when they were scared. Grace understood that. She'd done it herself more times than she could count. But she would remember, would watch him, would wait for the truth to come out. Because truth always did, sooner or later, for better or worse. Truth always found its way to the surface. Cole Whitfield woke to pain and the smell of wood smoke. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The ceiling above him was rough-hewn logs, not the smooth plaster of his bedroom at Diamond Star. The bed beneath him was straw and burlap, not the feather mattress his mother had ordered from Chicago 20 years ago. And there was a woman sitting by the fire, her back to him, stirring something in a copper pot. Memory came flooding back. The canyon, the rock slide, the moment between life and death when he'd been sure he was going to die alone. Except he hadn't died, and he wasn't alone. Cole turned his head, carefully fighting a wave of dizziness. The woman had dark hair pulled back in a braid that was coming undone. Her dress was torn in a dozen places, covered in dirt and what looked like blood. Her hands, when she lifted the pot off the fire, were bandaged with strips of cloth. She'd saved him. That much was clear. Pulled him out of the rock slide, brought him to this cabin, tended his wounds through what must have been a long night. Cole tried to speak. His throat was desert dry. The sound that came out was barely a whisper. The woman turned. Even exhausted, even covered in grime, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the wariness. She crossed to him with a tin cup of water, lifted his head with surprising gentleness, and held it to his lips. He drank. The water was warm, tasted faintly of herbs, but it was the finest thing he had ever tasted. Easy, she said, not too fast. Her voice was low, steady, the voice of someone used to taking care of others. Cole let her ease him back onto the straw mattress and tried to gather his scattered thoughts. This was Grace Hartwell. Had to be. The mail-order bride he'd sent for. The woman who should have been waiting at Thornfield Station while he rode up to meet her, assess her, test her worthiness. Instead, she'd found him broken and bleeding in a canyon. Had saved his life without knowing who he was. It was perfect. Better than he could have planned. A chance to see exactly what kind of woman she was when she thought he was nobody. When there was nothing in it for her but the satisfaction of helping someone in need. Catherine would have left him to die, would have taken his horse and his supplies and ridden away without looking back. Catherine had never done anything that didn't benefit Catherine. But this woman had stayed, had worked through the night to save a stranger. Her hands were torn up from moving rocks. Her dress was ruined. She'd clearly used her own undergarments to bandage his wounds. Why? What did she want? What was she after? The questions circled in Cole's mind as he looked at her. She was plain, just as her letters had suggested. Not ugly, but not the kind of beauty that turned heads. Thin, work-worn, the kind of woman you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and there was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of determination, of strength. "Who are you?" she asked. The moment of truth. Cole could tell her, could say, "I'm James Whitfield, the man who sent for you, and I'm sorry I wasn't at the station." Could start their relationship with honesty, but Catherine's ghost whispered in his ear. Beautiful, lying Catherine who'd played him for a fool. How do you know this one's any different? How do you know she won't change the moment she learns you're rich? Test her. See what she's made of. Make sure she's real before you trust her with your name, your ranch, your heart. Eli, Cole said, and hated himself for the lie even as it left his mouth. Name's Eli Stone. He watched her eyes, saw them narrow slightly, saw her notice the way his gaze had shifted just for a moment when he spoke the false name. She knew, or at least suspected, this woman was no fool. Eli Stone, she repeated. What were you doing in the canyon? Riding through. I worked on a ranch nearby. Another lie, easier than the first. The lies were piling up already, just like Dawson had warned. Got caught in the rock slide. Which ranch? Small spread. Nothing special. She handed him the cup again. He drank, grateful for the excuse not to meet her eyes. I'm Grace, she said. Grace Hartwell, from St. Louis. Cole nearly choked on the water. She'd said it so simply, so directly. No hesitation, no attempt to hide who she was or where she'd come from. What brings you to Wyoming? He asked, even though he knew, even though he'd sent the train ticket himself. I came to meet someone, a man who advertised for a bride. Grace's voice was flat, matter of fact. He was supposed to meet me at Thornfield Station yesterday. He didn't show. Cole felt the words like a physical blow, the disappointment in her voice, the resignation. As if she'd expected to be let down, expected men to break their promises, expected nothing good from the world. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. That's rough. Yes, well. Grace stood, moved back to the fire. The station master told me the man owns Diamond Star Ranch. Biggest spread in the territory, he said. Richest man for 3 territories. Cole froze, watched her carefully. Was there calculation in her voice, greed? The tone Catherine would have used, letting him know she understood his worth. But Grace's back was to him. He couldn't see her face, couldn't read her expression. You know it, she asked. Diamond Star. I've heard of it, Cole said carefully. Big operation. Whitfield's a powerful man. Powerful or not, he's a coward for not showing up. Grace poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up toward the smoke-stained chimney. I sold everything I owned to come here. Took a chance on 47 words in a newspaper. Guess I was a fool. Maybe he had a good reason. Maybe. Or maybe rich men think they can treat people however they want because money makes them better than everyone else. The bitterness in her voice surprised Cole. This wasn't greed talking. This was anger. Hurt. The response of someone who'd been genuinely hoping for something good and had been disappointed. Catherine had never sounded like that. Catherine had been smooth, charming. Every word calculated to please. Grace sounded real. But Catherine had seemed real too at first. Cole settled back against the straw mattress, his head throbbing. He needed to be careful, needed to watch, needed to see what Grace did over the next few days, how she treated him, what she revealed about herself when she thought nobody important was watching. The test had begun. Not the way he'd planned, but maybe better this way, more honest in its way, even though it was built on lies. "How bad am I hurt?" he asked. Grace turned to look at him. "Your head's going to scar. The leg's badly sprained, maybe torn ligaments. You'll be here at least a week before you can walk properly." A week. 7 days trapped in this cabin with the woman he was supposed to marry. 7 days to watch her, judge her, decide if she was worth trusting. 7 days of lying to her face. Cole closed his eyes, told himself it was necessary, told himself it was protection, told himself that when it was over, when he was sure she was different from Catherine, he'd tell her the truth and she'd understand. He almost believed it. Day 2, the cornbread. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of something cooking. Cole woke slowly, fighting through layers of pain. His head ached where the rock had split it open. His leg throbbed every time he moved. But he was alive, and that was more than he'd expected when the rockslide hit. Grace was at the fire again, tending something in the iron pot. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was still in that half-undone braid. She'd torn another strip from her petticoats. Sometime during the night he could see the ragged hem of her skirt. How much of herself had she sacrificed to save him? "Morning," he said. She turned, and for just a moment he saw the relief flash across her face, as if she'd been worried he might not wake up, as if his survival mattered to her. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I was buried under a rock slide." "That's accurate." She brought him water, the same tin cup refilled from the creek. "Can you sit up?" Cole tried. The world spun. Grace's hands were on his shoulders, steadying him, easing him up against the cabin wall. Her touch was professional, impersonal, the touch of someone who'd done this before. "Your mother was a nurse," he said, remembering what she'd told him, what she'd written in her letters, though he couldn't let on that he knew. Grace looked surprised. "How did you know?" "You said you came from St. Louis to meet someone. Station master probably mentioned Diamond Star Ranch. And you knew how to treat my wounds. Seems like you had training." It was a reasonable explanation. Barely. Grace studied him for a moment, those dark eyes searching his face. Then she nodded. "Yes, my mother served in the war, field hospitals. She learned medicine from necessity and taught it to me." "She taught you well. I'd be dead without what you did last night." "Probably." Grace went back to the fire. "I need to check your wounds, make sure there's no infection setting in." She unwrapped the bandage on his head with careful fingers. The cloth stuck in places where blood had dried. Cole gritted his teeth but didn't make a sound. "It's clean," Grace said. "No red streaks, no pus. The herbs are working." "What did you use?" "Mugwort for the wound, yarrow for the fever. Both common, both effective if you know how to use them." She rewrapped his head with fresh cloth torn from what Cole was beginning to realize was a rapidly disappearing petticoat. How much longer before she ran out of material? What would she use then next? She checked his leg, unwrapped the bandage around his ankle. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the bruising had spread, purple and yellow stains creeping up his calf. "Can you move your toes?" Cole tried. Pain shot through his foot, but his toes wiggled. "Good. Not broken, but you won't be walking for a while." "How long?" "Week, maybe more if you don't stay off it." Grace rewrapped the ankle, her hands efficient. "We need to take stock, figure out what we have to work with." She was right. Cole watched as she laid out their resources. From his saddlebag, which she'd brought from the horse, a bedroll, a canteen, a knife, matches, a spare shirt, $50 in bills tucked into an inside pocket that Grace carefully didn't touch, though she must have seen the money when she searched the bag. Catherine would have taken it. would have pocketed the bills and claimed they must have been lost in the rock slide. Grace didn't even acknowledge it was there. From her own bag, 2 dresses, a wool shawl, a leather-bound journal, and food. 6 pieces of cornbread wrapped in cloth. 6 dried apples. That was it. That was everything. Cole did the math. 2 people, 12 pieces of food. If they rationed carefully, maybe 3 days. 4 at most. There's a bait trap outside, Grace said. Left over from whoever lived here before. I checked it this morning. Caught a rabbit. You know how to skin a rabbit? My mother taught me a lot of things. Grace's voice was matter-of-fact. We'll have meat for today and tomorrow. After that, we'll need to catch more or figure out something else. She was so calm, so practical. No panic, no hysteria, just assessment and planning. Cole had run Diamond Star for 8 years, had managed 30 men and 10,000 head of cattle, had dealt with drought and disease and market crashes. He recognized competence when he saw it. Grace Hartwell was competent. But was she kind? Was she good? Was she someone who would care for a man with nothing, or only for a man who could give her everything? The test continued. Grace cooked the rabbit over the fire, seasoning it with wild herbs she'd gathered from the creek bank. The smell filled the cabin, made Cole's stomach growl with hunger he hadn't felt in years. At Diamond Star, food was abundant. He ate when he wanted what he wanted. Plenty was a given. Here in this abandoned cabin with this woman he barely knew, hunger was real. Survival was uncertain. It changed things, made everything sharper, more immediate. Grace divided the meat onto 2 tin plates she'd found in the cabin. Gave him the larger portion. You need strength to heal, she said simply. Then she pulled out the cornbread, 6 pieces left wrapped in faded cloth. She unwrapped them, carefully, reverently. The bread was dry, crumbling, clearly days old. She broke 1 piece in half, looked at the 2 portions in her hands. For a moment, Cole saw calculation in her eyes, saw her weighing something. Then she handed him the larger piece. Here. Cole stared at the cornbread in his hand. It couldn't have weighed more than a few ounces. Probably wasn't worth more than a penny in any store. But the way Grace looked at it, you'd think it was gold. What about you? He asked. I've got mine. That's enough. She settled by the fire with her smaller piece and ate slowly, making it last. Cole looked at the bread, at Grace, at the careful way she rationed every bite. This was all she had, her last food from home, probably her last comfort, and she'd given him the bigger piece without hesitation. Catherine would have taken both, would have smiled sweetly and said she needed to keep her strength up, would have let him starve while she thrived. Grace was giving to a stranger, to a man she thought was a poor ranch hand with nothing to offer her. No reason to be kind except kindness itself. Cole felt something crack in his chest, something hard and defensive that had been there since the day he'd found Catherine in that Abilene saloon. Maybe, just maybe. This woman was different. He ate the cornbread slowly, let each bite dissolve on his tongue. And when he was done, he looked at Grace sitting by the fire, and something in his carefully constructed test began to feel wrong. Day 3, teaching. By the 3rd day, Cole could sit up without the world spinning, could even stand for a few minutes leaning heavily against the wall before his leg gave out. Grace had been right. The ankle wasn't broken, but it was badly damaged. Every step sent lightning bolts of pain shooting up his leg. Walking was going to take time. You're pushing too hard, Grace said, watching him hobble across the cabin. I need to be able to move. You need to heal. There's a difference. She was probably right, but Cole was used to being active, used to being in control. Lying on a straw mattress while someone else took care of him felt wrong, weak. He made it to the door before his leg buckled. Grace caught him before he fell, her shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. Stubborn, she said. I've been told. Stubbornness will either save you or kill you. I'll take my chances. She helped him back to the cot. He sank onto it gratefully, breathing hard. His leg was throbbing. The effort had opened something up, sent fresh pain radiating through his ankle. Let me look, Grace said. She unwrapped the bandage, examined the swelling. Her fingers probed gently along the bone. Cole gritted his teeth but didn't pull away. The swelling's going down, she said. But you've set yourself back. Another few days before you can put weight on it now. I don't have another few days. Why not you got somewhere to be? Cole almost laughed. Yeah, he had somewhere to be. Had a ranch to run, 30 men waiting for orders, cattle to move. A life that didn't stop just because he'd been stupid enough to ride through a canyon during a rock slide. But he couldn't say that. Couldn't tell Grace that he owned the biggest spread in 3 territories. That he had men out searching for him right now. That his foreman was probably going crazy with worry. Just eager to get moving, he said instead. Grace wrapped his ankle again, tied the cloth tight. Well, you're not moving anywhere today. Or tomorrow, so you might as well make peace with being stuck here. She was right. And if he was honest, part of him didn't mind. Part of him wanted to stay in this cabin, in this strange, suspended moment where he could watch Grace without pretense, could see who she really was. Teach me, he said suddenly. Grace looked up. Teach you what the herbs, the plants you've been using. I want to know what you know. She studied him. Why? Because you saved my life with them. Seems worth knowing. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. Then something shifted in her expression. A softening, as if the request had touched something in her. All right, she said, but we'll have to go outside. Can you make it to the creek? Cole stood, tested his weight on the bad leg. Pain flared but bearable. I can make it. Grace handed him a sturdy branch she'd stripped to use as a walking stick. Together, they made their way out of the cabin down the short slope to the creek bank. The afternoon sun was warm on Cole's face. Fresh air after 3 days in the smoky cabin. The creek gurgled over smooth stones, clear and cold. Cottonwoods provided dappled shade. It was beautiful. In all his years ranching in Wyoming, Cole had forgotten to notice things like this. The simple beauty of water and stone, and growing things. Grace led him to a patch of plants near the water's edge. She knelt, touched the silver-green leaves. Mugwort, she said. See these leaves? Soft, almost furry. Smell it. Cole bent as far as his leg would allow, broke off a leaf and brought it to his nose. Sharp, bitter, medicinal. That smell means it's ready, Grace explained. You crush it into a paste for wounds. Prevents infection. My mother learned this during the war, saved dozens of soldiers with it. How do you know it's mugwort and not something else, something poisonous? The leaves. Look at the shape. Look at how they're cut almost like feathers. And the silver color underneath. Nothing else looks quite like it. She showed him yarrow next. White flowers in flat clusters. Explained how to steep it for fever. How to use fresh leaves on swelling. How do you remember it all? Cole asked. Practice. My mother made me learn every plant in the woods behind our boarding house. Tested me until I could name them with my eyes closed. Your mother sounds like she was a good woman. Grace's expression closed. She was practical. That's what kept us alive. There was pain there, old pain carefully buried. Cole wanted to ask about it, wanted to know what had happened to make Grace's voice go flat when she talked about her mother. But he didn't have the right, not when he was lying to her about everything. They spent an hour by the creek, Grace teaching, Cole learning. She showed him dock root, how to dig for it. Explained the difference between the medicinal variety and the one that would make you sick. Details save lives, she said. It sounded like something she'd been told many times. A lesson learned young and never forgotten. At one point, Grace lost her footing on the slick creek bank, started to fall. Cole reached out instinctively, caught her arm, pulled her steady. For a moment, they stood frozen, her arm in his hand, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her dark eyes, could smell the herbs on her fingers and the wood smoke in her hair. Grace pulled away first. Thank you. You saved my life. Least I can do is catch you when you fall. Something flickered in her expression. Then it was gone, hidden behind that practical mask she wore. They made their way back to the cabin as the sun started to sink. Cole's leg was screaming by the time they reached the door, but it had been worth it. He'd learned something, not just about plants, about Grace. She was smart, patient, a good teacher. She'd explained things clearly, answered his questions without condescension, had seemed genuinely pleased when he remembered the difference between yarrow and dock root on his own. Catherine had never taught him anything, had never shared knowledge or skills. Everything with her had been about taking, receiving, never giving. Grace gave freely, even to a man she thought had nothing. That night, as they ate the last of the rabbit and two more pieces of cornbread, Cole found himself watching her across the fire. Found himself wondering what it would be like to tell her the truth. To say, I'm James Whitfield, and I'm sorry I lied, but I was scared. Scared you'd be like the last woman who broke me. But the words stuck in his throat. Because what if she changed when she knew? What if this kindness, this patience, this generosity disappeared the moment she learned he was rich? Better to wait. Better to be sure. The lies piled higher. Day 4, the hunters. Grace was gathering wild onions along the creek when she heard the horses. Two riders, coming from the west, moving slowly like they were searching for something. She froze crouched behind a stand of brush and listened. We've been combing this canyon for 3 days, a rough voice said. Whitfield's got to be here somewhere. Grace's breath caught. Whitfield. They were looking for James Whitfield, the man who'd stood her up at the station, the man who owned Diamond Star Ranch. Dead or alive, Dawson said, a second voice answered. $500 reward. That's a year's wages. $500 for finding a man, dead or alive. Grace's mind raced. Was Whitfield in trouble? Had something happened to him? Rich bastard probably broke his neck in that rock slide last week. We find the body, we still get paid. Rock slide. Last week, the same rock slide that had nearly killed Eli. No, not Eli. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The expensive saddle on the horse. The silver ring with initials she hadn't been able to read. The way he'd hesitated before giving his name. The way his eyes had shifted when he'd lied. Eli Stone was James Whitfield. The man she'd saved. The man she'd cared for. The man she'd given her last food to and taught about herbs and caught when he stumbled. He was the rich rancher who'd sent for her, who'd promised to meet her, who'd left her waiting on that platform like forgotten luggage, and he'd been lying to her for 3 days. Grace's hands clenched into fists, anger burned hot in her chest, but underneath it something colder. Hurt, the deep hurt of betrayal. He'd tested her. That's what this was. Some kind of test to see if she was worthy of his riches, to see if she'd be kind to a poor man or only to a rich one, like she was livestock, like her kindness needed proving. The horses were getting closer. Grace forced herself to think past the anger. 2 men looking for Whitfield, offering a reward, dead or alive. That last part worried her. Grace stood and walked toward the riders before she could second-guess herself. They saw her immediately. 2 rough-looking men on tired horses. The older one had a scar across his cheek. The younger one couldn't have been more than 20, but his eyes were hard. Ma'am, the scarred one said, tipping his hat. You all right out here by yourself? Just fine, thank you. Grace kept her voice steady. Can I help you, gentlemen? We're looking for a man. Went missing in a rock slide about a week back. You seen anyone? Grace thought about the cabin, about Eli or Cole or whatever his real name was, about the lies he'd told in the test he was running, about how easy it would be to point these men toward him, to let someone else deal with the rich rancher who thought he could play with people's lives. Haven't seen nobody, she heard herself say. Just me out here. The younger one squinted at her. Big canyon for one woman. What are you doing here? Belonged to my uncle. He died last winter. I'm cleaning it out to sell. The lie came easily, too easily. Grace was getting good at lying. 3 days with a man who lied with every breath, and now she was doing it too. You sure there's a reward for information? $500. $500, more money than Grace had seen in her entire life. Enough to get back to St. Louis. Enough to start over somewhere new. Anywhere but here. I'm sure, Grace said firmly. Now, if you gentlemen are done, I've got work to do. The scarred man studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. You be careful out here, ma'am. Canyon's not safe. They rode away. Grace watched until they disappeared around a bend. Then she ran back to the cabin. Cole was sitting up, his face pale. He'd heard the horses. Had probably heard the whole conversation. They're looking for you, Grace said. Her voice was flat, cold. James Whitfield, owner of Diamond Star Ranch. That's who you really are, isn't it? Cole didn't deny it, didn't even try. He just looked at her with those gray eyes and nodded. Yes. How long have you known who I am? From the beginning. The confirmation hit like a slap. Grace had suspected, had known really since that first hesitation when he'd given his name. But hearing him admit it, hearing him say he'd known all along. I saved your life, she said. The words came out shaking. I sat up all night when you had fever. I gave you half my food. I lied to those men just now to protect you. And you've been lying to me the entire time. Grace, I can explain. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't you dare try to explain. I know exactly what this is. You were testing me, seeing if I'd be kind to a poor man, making sure I wasn't after your money. Cole's silence was answer enough. You know what the worst part is? Grace's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I understand. I understand being afraid, being careful, not knowing who to trust. She met his eyes. But you could have just asked me, could have been honest, could have given me the same respect you demanded from me. I'm sorry. Or are you just sorry you got caught? Cole flinched. Both. I'm sorry for both. Grace turned away, looked at the fire, at the empty pot where their supplies were running out, at the torn strips of her petticoat still drying by the hearth. Those men will be back, she said. They're searching the canyon. Eventually they'll find this place. I know. You need to decide what you're going to do. Stay hidden and hope they miss us, or reveal yourself and end this charade. What do you think I should do? Grace laughed. It came out bitter. You want my advice after lying to me for days, after testing me, like I was some kind of fraud you needed to expose? Yes, Cole said quietly. I want your advice. I think, Grace said, you should do whatever lets you sleep at night, because I clearly can't tell what's real and what's performance with you. She walked out of the cabin, needed air, needed space, needed to be away from the man who'd taken her hope and turned it into another test to fail. Behind her, she heard Cole call her name, but she didn't stop. Day 5, Catherine's ghost. That night, Cole dreamed of Catherine. It started the way it always did, the day they met, the train station in Cheyenne. Her stepping off in a blue dress that matched her eyes, a small case in her hand, looking nervous and hopeful and perfect. He'd been 30, alone, recently orphaned. The ranch was thriving but empty. He'd wanted someone to share it with, someone to build a life with, someone to matter to. The advertisement had been simple. Rancher seeks wife, must value family and hard work. Write if interested. Catherine's letter had been beautiful. Elegant handwriting, thoughtful words. She talked about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing her parents, about wanting a simple life with a good man. Every word a lie. In the dream, Cole watched himself fall in love with her, watched himself be charmed by her smile, her laugh, the way she seemed to fit perfectly into his life. They married after a month, 6 weeks of bliss, 6 weeks of believing he'd found someone real. Then came the day he'd opened his safe and found $2,000 missing. The scene shifted. The dream took him to Abilene, to the saloon where he'd tracked her down, to the moment he'd pushed through the doors and seen her. Catherine sitting on a gambler's lap, laughing, cards spread on the table, money stacked in piles. And when she saw Cole, she hadn't even had the grace to look ashamed. Did you really think I loved you? Dream Catherine said. Her voice was cruel, cold. You're so dull, Cole, so boring. A cowboy who smells like cattle. I was acting. Every smile, every kiss. Acting. The gambler Jack Morrison had laughed. We've done this 6 times, Whitfield. Rich, lonely men are the easiest marks. They're so desperate to believe someone could love them. The worst part came next, the part Cole's mind forced him to relive over and over. It wasn't even legal, Catherine had said. I'm already married, to Jack. Have been for 5 years. Your marriage void, meaningless, like you. In the dream, Cole felt it all again. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sickening realization that every moment of their relationship had been a performance, that he'd been played for a fool. The scene shifted again. Now he was in the cabin. Grace was there, but she was changing. Her face became Catherine's. Her voice became cruel. You thought I was different, Dream Grace said. I saved you because I knew you were rich, because Thomas Dawson told me about the reward. $500 I can get more by marrying you, by playing the kind, selfless bride until you trust me, then taking everything. No, Cole said in the dream. You're not like her. You're different. Am I? Catherine's face. Grace's voice. You don't know me at all, Cole. You just see what you want to see. Another pretty lie to believe in. The dream twisted darker. Grace was leaving, taking his horse, taking his money, laughing as she rode away. Fool me once, she called back. Shame on you. Fool me twice. Cole jerked awake, his heart pounding, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cool night air. It was just a dream. Grace was still here, still sleeping by the fire, her back to him, wrapped in the thin wool shawl. But the fear was real, the doubt was real. What if she was playing him? What if this kindness was just another performance? What if he was being a fool all over again? He must have made a sound. Grace stirred, turned to look at him in the dim firelight. You all right? She asked. Her voice was cool, still angry from their confrontation earlier. Bad dream. She didn't ask what about, just added wood to the fire and settled back into her blanket. Cole lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Catherine, about Grace, about the impossible task of knowing who to trust when the last person you trusted destroyed you. Near dawn, still half asleep, he heard himself whisper, I'm sorry, Grace. I'm so sorry. If she heard, she didn't respond. Day 6, the storm. The storm came without warning. One moment, the afternoon sky was clear. The next, black clouds rolled over the canyon rim like an invading army. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. Wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls. Then the rain hit. It came down in sheets, violent, relentless. The kind of high country storm that could turn creeks into rivers and wash away anything not tied down. The cabin roof, already damaged, started leaking immediately. One drip, then another, then 5, 10, a dozen. Water poured through gaps in the shingles, ran down the walls, pooled on the packed dirt floor. Move the supplies! Grace shouted over the roar of rain. She was already grabbing their bags, pulling them toward the corner that seemed driest. Cole tried to stand. His leg buckled. Grace caught him before he fell. The cot, she said. Help me move it. Together they dragged the wooden frame toward the same corner. The straw mattress was already soaking through. Water dripped on Cole's head, ran down his neck. The fire in the hearth sputtered and died, plunging the cabin into gray gloom. Within minutes, the cabin had transformed. Water everywhere, the floor turning to mud. Their carefully organized supplies soaked and scattered. Grace and Cole ended up pressed together in the one dry corner, barely 4 feet square. Their backs against the stone chimney, still warm from the dead fire. One blanket pulled over both of them because everything else was wet. Thunder cracked directly overhead. So close, Cole felt it in his bones. Grace flinched against him. It's all right, he said, though he had no way of knowing if that was true. The roof's coming down. Grace's voice was steady despite the fear. Another storm like this, and we won't have shelter at all. She was right. Cole could see it, the way the beams sagged, the way water ran in rivers instead of drips. This cabin had been abandoned for a reason. It couldn't withstand a real Wyoming storm. They needed to leave, get to Diamond Star, get to safety. But that meant ending the test, revealing himself, admitting everything. Lightning lit the cabin bright as day. In that flash, Cole saw Grace's face, saw the exhaustion there, the determination, the strength it took to stay calm when everything was falling apart. This woman had pulled him from a rock slide, had saved his life with herbs and care and sleepless nights, had given him her last food and taught him about plants and lied to protect him even after she knew he'd lied to her. What more proof did he need? Grace, he said. The name felt heavy in his mouth. Important. There's something I need to tell you. She turned to look at him. They were close. So close he could see water droplets caught in her hair, could feel her breath against his cheek. What? About who I am, about why I lied, about Catherine and what she did to me and why I'm so damn scared to trust anyone. The words came faster now, urgent, like if he didn't say them all at once, he'd lose his nerve. I was wrong, I know I was wrong, but I need you to understand why. Grace's eyes searched his face. For a moment, Cole thought she might tell him to stop. Might say she didn't care about his reasons, that his excuses didn't matter. But she just waited. Let him speak. 3 years ago, a woman answered my advertisement for a wife. Cole forced himself to hold Grace's gaze. Her name was Catherine. She was beautiful, charming, said all the right things. We married after a month. Thunder rolled, rain pounded harder. 6 weeks later, I found out she was already married to a gambler named Jack Morrison. They'd been running a con, targeting lonely ranchers. She'd take the money he'd fence any valuables and they'd move on to the next mark. I'm sorry, Grace said quietly. When I confronted her, she laughed, said I was boring, dull, that every moment with me had been an act, that I was just another fool. Cole's throat tightened. Even now, 3 years later, the humiliation burned. So when your letter came, I told myself I'd be smarter this time. I'd test you first. Make sure you were real before I risked getting hurt again. By lying to me. By lying to you, yes. Cole looked down at his hands. Thought if you showed kindness to a man with nothing, I'd know you were different. Know you weren't after my money. And did you learn what you wanted to know? Yes, you're nothing like her. You're real Grace. Genuinely, completely real. Outside, the storm raged. A massive crack of thunder shook the cabin. Then cutting through the noise, a different sound. A horse screaming. Cole's head snapped toward the door. Copper. His horse. He'd left her tied outside the cabin, sheltered under the eaves. But that scream was terror. He was moving before he could think. Pushing to his feet, ignoring the pain in his leg. Cole, wait. Grace grabbed his arm. You can't. That's my horse. If she runs, we're stranded. He pulled free and stumbled to the door, threw it open. The storm hit him like a wall, rain so thick he could barely see, wind trying to tear him off his feet. Copper was rearing against her tether. Eyes rolling white with fear. Lightning had struck close, maybe hit a tree. The mare was going to break her neck if she kept fighting. Cole lurched forward. His boots sank into mud that sucked at his feet with every step. The bad ankle gave out. He went down hard, face first into the muck. Mud filled his mouth, his nose. He couldn't breathe, couldn't see. For a moment, he was back under the rock slide, buried, dying. Then hands were on him. Grace, pulling him up, helping him stand. Together, they reached the horse. Cole grabbed the reins with one hand, Grace's shoulder with the other. Copper was still fighting, still panicking, but Cole held on, talked to her in a voice he hoped was calm. Easy, girl, easy. It's just a storm, just noise, you're all right. It took 5 minutes, 10, forever. But gradually the horse calmed, stopped fighting, stood trembling but steady. Cole tied her to a sturdier post, made sure the knot would hold. Then he turned to head back to the cabin and saw Grace. She was covered in mud, head to toe, soaked through, shivering. But she'd stayed, had helped, had risked the storm to help him save a horse. Come on, she said. Her teeth were chattering. Before we both die of cold. They made it back to the cabin, collapsed in their corner. Both of them covered in mud and rain, both shaking, both alive. Grace looked at him. Then impossibly, she laughed. You look like you crawled out of a grave. Cole looked down at himself, mud-caked every inch, his face, his hair, his clothes. He probably looked like some kind of swamp creature. Feel like it too, he managed. They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing, just being alive. You were going to tell me something, Grace said finally, before the storm hit. Cole nodded. I was going to tell you the truth, all of it. I already know the truth. You're James Whitfield. You own Diamond Star Ranch. You tested me because someone hurt you. There's more. About why I wasn't at the station. About where I was going when the rock slide hit. Cole took a breath. I was on my way to meet you, Grace. To pick you up and bring you to the ranch. The rock slide happened in Saddleback Canyon because I was taking the shortcut to Thornfield. Grace went very still. I was coming to get you, and I'd already decided, already planned. I was going to lie about who I was going to pretend to be a ranch hand named Eli Stone, was going to test you to make sure you weren't like Catherine. So this wasn't an accident. You planned this deception from the start. Yes, and then the rocks came down, And I woke up and you were there, and you didn't know who I was. And it seemed like Providence, like fate giving me exactly what I'd been planning anyway. Grace stood, moved away from him, put space between them. Do you have any idea, she said slowly, how that makes me feel? Knowing that even if the rock slide hadn't happened, you would have lied to me anyway. That this whole thing was always going to be a test. Grace, I'm sorry. You tested me like I was livestock at auction, like my kindness needed proving, like I was guilty until proven innocent. You're right, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Then why did you do it? The question hung in the wet air. Cole struggled to find words. Because Catherine broke something in me, he said finally. Broke my ability to trust. To believe people could want me for me and not my money. I've spent 3 years afraid. Afraid of being played again. Afraid of being the fool. So you made me prove I wasn't her. Made me earn trust you should have given freely. Yes. Grace wrapped her arms around herself. Stared at the rain pouring through the roof. Those men looking for you, your men from the ranch, they're offering a $500 reward. I know. I could have told them, could have pointed them here, could have collected that money and left you to explain yourself. Why didn't you? Grace finally looked at him. Her eyes were hard, hurt, angry. Because despite everything, I don't believe you deserve to be ambushed by bounty hunters. And because I'm apparently the kind of fool who protects people even when they lie to her. She turned back to the rain. We can't stay here, she said. The cabin won't survive another storm. We need to leave. I know. Which means going to your ranch, ending this pretense, facing whatever comes next. Yes. And when we get there, when everyone knows who you are and what you did, what then? Cole didn't have an answer. He'd been so focused on the test, on protecting himself, that he hadn't thought past it, hadn't considered what would happen when the truth came out. I don't know, he admitted. Grace nodded, like she'd expected that answer. We leave in the morning, she said, assuming the storm passes. Then she settled into the wet corner, wrapped what was left of the blanket around her shoulders and turned her back to him. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a different kind of storm was just beginning. Morning came with silence. The storm had passed sometime in the dark hours before dawn, leaving the canyon washed clean and dripping. Grace woke to pale sunlight streaming through the waste in the ruined cabin roof, illuminating the destruction the storm had left behind. Water stood in pools across the floor. Their supplies were soaked. The walls had a lean to them now that hadn't been there before. One more storm and this place would collapse completely. Cole was already awake, sitting on the cot, testing weight on his injured leg. He looked up when Grace stirred. How is it? She asked. Her voice was cool, professional. The voice of someone doing a necessary job, nothing more. Better. Still hurts, but I can walk. Then we should go. Grace gathered what little they had left, her bag now water-stained, the herb journal which she'd managed to keep dry wrapped in her wool shawl, the remaining cornbread soggy but still edible, 2 apples left, everything else was ruined or scattered. A week ago this would have devastated her. These were all her possessions, all she owned in the world. Now it just felt like more loss, more things taken. She was getting used to it. Cole saddled his horse, moving slowly, favoring the bad leg. Copper nuzzled him calm now after the storm's terror. Grace watched him check the cinch, adjust the stirrups, move with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent his life with horses. A rich man, the richest man in 3 territories. And she'd given him her last food, had torn up her undergarments to bandage his wounds, had stayed up all night tending his fever, while he lied. We'll ride together, Cole said, leading the horse to the cabin. You in front, I'll sit behind and keep you steady. Grace wanted to refuse, wanted to say she'd walk the 7 miles to his ranch rather than sit that close to him. But practicality won. Her feet were already blistered from the walk through the canyon a week ago, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She let him help her into the saddle. Then Cole swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to hold the reins. His chest pressed against her back. Close. Too close. She could feel his heartbeat, could smell the mud and wood smoke, and something underneath that was just him. Grace sat rigid, refusing to lean back, refusing to give him any comfort. Ready? Cole asked quietly. Just go. They rode out of Saddleback Canyon in silence. The path was muddy from the storm, treacherous in places, but Copper picked her way carefully. They passed the spot where the rock slide had happened. Fresh scars on the canyon wall. Boulders still scattered across the trail. The place where this had all begun. Grace looked away. The canyon walls opened gradually, revealing the grassland beyond. Mile after mile of rolling prairie stretching toward distant mountains. The sky was enormous, blue and endless. The storm had cleared the air, made everything sharp and clean. It should have been beautiful. Grace just felt empty. They'd been riding for maybe 2 hours when Cole spoke. I know you're angry. I'm not angry. Grace's voice was flat. Angry would require me to care. Grace, don't, just don't. She stared straight ahead. You made your choice when you decided to test me. When you decided my honesty wasn't worth your trust. Now I've made mine, which is to get through this, to survive, like I always do. Cole's arm tightened around her waist. I don't want you to just survive. I want you to have a home, a life, everything I promised in those letters. Those letters were from James Whitfield. I don't know who you are. The words hit hard. Grace felt Cole flinch behind her. I'm the same man who wrote them. Are you? Because that man said he valued honesty. This man lied for 7 days straight. Silence fell between them again. Heavy, uncomfortable. They rode on. Around midday, Grace saw the first cattle. A small herd grazing in the distance, too far to make out the brand. Then more. Dozens. Hundreds. Scattered across the grassland as far as she could see. Diamond Star cattle, Cole said quietly, were on my land now. His land. 50,000 acres. An empire built over 3 generations. And Grace had nothing. $6 in her pocket. A ruined dress. A journal full of herb remedies that couldn't buy her a meal, or a roof or a future. She'd gambled everything on 47 words and lost. The first rider appeared around 2 o'clock. Grace saw him crest a rise to the east at a young man on a paint horse driving a small group of cattle toward a fence line. He spotted them immediately, wheeled his horse around, started riding toward them at a gallop. Cole's arm tightened around Grace's waist. Here we go, he said quietly. The rider pulled up 20 feet away, his horse dancing sideways. He was young, maybe 22, with sun-darkened skin and eyes gone wide with shock. Mr. Whitfield. The words burst out of him. Sweet Jesus, we thought you were dead. Grace felt Cole's breath catch, felt the moment of truth arrive. Hello, Tom, Cole said. We've been searching the canyon for 6 days. Mr. Dawson's been beside himself. The young man Tom was talking fast, excited, relieved. Found your hat, all that blood on the rocks. We thought, I know what you thought. I'm all right, Tom. Banged up but alive. Tom's eyes finally shifted to Grace. Took in her torn dress, her muddy appearance, the way she sat stiff and separate, despite Cole's arm around her. Ma'am, he said, touching his hat brim, curious but too well trained to ask. Grace didn't respond. Ride ahead, Cole told him. Tell Dawson I'm coming in, and that I have a guest. Yes, sir. Tom wheeled his horse, then paused. Sir, should I tell him who? Just say a guest. He'll understand. Tom rode off at a gallop, disappearing over the rise. Grace waited until he was gone. Then she turned her head just enough to see Cole's face. Mr. Whitfield, she said. The title was cold, formal. That's what he called you. Yes. And you let him, didn't correct him, didn't say, call me Eli. Grace, well, how many more riders are we going to pass? How many more people who know exactly who you are while I sit here like a fool? You're not a fool. Then what am I? The question hung between them. Cole didn't answer. They rode in silence for another hour. Past 3 more riders. Each one reacted the same. Shock, relief, a respectful Mr. Whitfield or boss before riding ahead to spread the news. Each one like another nail in the coffin of whatever Grace had hoped might exist between her and the man who'd written those letters. The gate appeared as they crested a final rise. Massive oak posts weathered silver gray with age. A cross beam 12 feet high, and mounted on that beam a 5-pointed star, wrought iron, black against the blue sky, 6 feet across. Diamond Star, established 1865. Below the gate, buildings spread across the landscape like a small town. A two-story house, white-painted rails along a wraparound porch, lace curtains in the windows, red geraniums in flower boxes. The largest barn Grace had ever seen, 50 stalls at least, multiple outbuildings, corrals, a bunkhouse, a forge with smoke rising from its chimney, and land. Endless rolling grasslands stretching to the horizon in every direction. This was what James Whitfield owned. This was what he'd been afraid Grace was after. She almost laughed, as if she could ever have imagined this, as if her small dreams of a roof and four walls could have encompassed something this vast. Grace, Cole said quietly, before we go in, before everyone knows, I need you to understand something. What? I was wrong about testing you, about lying, about all of it, but the feelings were real, are real. His voice dropped. When I wrote those letters, I meant every word. And these past 7 days, getting to know you, watching you save my life, and then save it again every day after. That was real too. Grace said nothing. I don't expect you to forgive me. Don't even expect you to stay. But I needed you to know before we cross that gate, before everything changes. Everything already changed, Grace said, the moment you decided to lie. They rode through the gate. An old man came running from the barn, white hair flying, face creased with age and sun, and something that might have been tears. Mr. Whitfield, he was shouting, running despite a limp that spoke of old war wounds. Cole, dear God, you're alive. He reached the horse as Cole dismounted, grabbed Cole's shoulders, looked him over with the fierce attention of someone who'd been prepared for the worst. We found your hat in that canyon, blood everywhere. I thought, we all thought. I know, Tom. I'm sorry. The rock slide hit, and I couldn't get word to you. The old man Dawson Grace remembered from Cole's stories stepped back, wiped his eyes without shame. Don't apologize for surviving. Just glad you're here. His gaze shifted to Gray Race, stared still on the horse. Thomas Dawson, foreman of Diamond Star. Grace slid down from the saddle without waiting for help. Her legs were shaky from hours of riding. She nearly stumbled. Dawson reached out to steady her, his grip gentle. This is Grace Hartwell, Cole said, from St. Louis. She saved my life. Dawson's eyes widened, just a fraction, just enough to show he recognized the name. Miss Hartwell, we're in your debt. No debt, Grace said. Her voice was steady despite the trembling in her legs. I did what anyone would do. Not anyone. Dawson was studying her carefully, reading her the way good foremen learn to read people. Most would have ridden for help, left a stranger to die. You stayed. Grace didn't respond. Around them, hands were gathering, drawn by the commotion. 20 men, 30, all stopping their work to stare at the boss they'd thought was dead. Cole raised his voice. Get back to work. Cattle don't feed themselves. They scattered, but Grace could feel their eyes, their curiosity, the questions they'd be asking in the bunkhouse tonight. Dawson, Cole said, have Mrs. Patterson prepare the east bedroom. Miss Hartwell will be staying with us. Already done, sir. Soon as Tom brought word you were coming. Dawson paused. The rooms had been ready for a week. The room prepared for a bride, for the woman James Whitfield had sent for. Grace felt something twist in her chest. Take the horse, Cole told Dawson. I need to speak with Miss Hartwell, privately. Dawson nodded, led Copper toward the barn, left them standing in the yard covered in mud and dried blood and the wreckage of a week that had changed everything. Grace turned to face Cole. Around them, hands pretended not to watch while watching everything. You lied to me, she said, loud enough for the nearest hands to hear. Let them know. Let everyone know. For 7 days, you knew who I was from the moment you woke up in that cabin. And you lied. Cole didn't deny it. Yes. I saved your life, gave you my last food, tore up my clothes to bandage your wounds, and you tested me like I was livestock at auction. Grace, don't. She held up a hand. I need you to understand something. I didn't come here for your money. I came here because 47 words promised me honesty, promised me a place where I belonged, where I mattered. Her voice cracked. She steadied it. Turns out those 47 words were lies too. She turned and walked toward the house. Behind her, she heard Cole call her name, heard his boots on the packed earth as he followed. Grace didn't stop, didn't look back. A woman appeared on the porch, 55 maybe, gray hair pulled back, kind eyes and a weathered face. She took in Grace's appearance, her torn dress, her muddy hands, and her expression softened. "Miss Hartwell, I'm Helen Patterson, housekeeper. Let's get you cleaned up." Grace climbed the steps, crossed the threshold into a house that should have been her home, and felt nothing but the cold weight of betrayal. The prepared room. The east bedroom was perfect. That was the worst part. Not that it was too much or not enough or wrong in some obvious way, but that it was exactly right. Exactly what Grace would have chosen if she'd had the means to choose anything. Mrs. Patterson opened the door and stepped aside. Grace walked into a room 3 times the size of the boarding house space she'd left behind in St. Louis. Hardwood floors polished to a shine, whitewashed walls, a large bed with a quilt stitched in a pattern of interlocking wedding rings. The same pattern her grandmother had made, the pattern her mother had taught her to recognize. A wardrobe of dark oak stood against one wall, its doors slightly open to reveal fabric inside. Dresses, multiple dresses in different colors. A washstand with a porcelain basin painted with tiny roses. A pitcher beside it already filled with water. A rocking chair positioned by the window to catch the morning light. A bookshelf with volumes Grace recognized. Whitman, Austen, Longfellow. And on the dresser, a brush and mirror set, silver, engraved with delicate flowers. "Mr. Whitfield had me prepare the room 3 weeks ago," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "When he first sent for you, he wanted it to be ready." Grace stood in the center of the floor and tried to breathe past the tightness in her chest. He'd done this, had chosen these things, had thought about what she might like, what she might need, had prepared a space for her in his home, while planning to lie to her the entire time. "The dresses should fit," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Mr. Whitfield described your size from your letters. If anything needs adjusting, I can do that." "He thought of everything," Grace said. Her voice sounded hollow. "He wanted you to feel welcome." Grace almost laughed. Welcome. In a room prepared for a woman he planned to test. A woman he didn't trust enough to be honest with. "I'll leave you to freshen up," Mrs. Patterson said. "There's a basin of hot water coming, clean towels in the stand. If you need anything, pull the cord by the door." She left. Grace heard her footsteps fade down the hall. Alone, Grace crossed to the window. It faced east, just as Mrs. Patterson had said, toward where the sun would rise, toward new beginnings. The view showed the ranch stretching away toward distant mountains, cattle grazing, horses in a far corral, men working, all of it organized, productive, prosperous. James Whitfield's empire. Grace looked down at herself. Torn dress, muddy boots, hands scraped raw and barely healing. She looked like a beggar, like someone who'd crawled out of poverty hoping for scraps. Maybe that's what she was. The door opened again. A young woman entered carrying a basin of steaming water. She set it on the washstand, bobbed a quick curtsy, and left without speaking. Grace crossed to the basin, dipped her hands in. The heat stung her raw palms, but felt good, clean. She washed her face, her arms, her neck, watched the water turn brown with dirt and dried blood. When she was done, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, hair tangled beyond saving, bruises on her arms from moving rocks. She looked exhausted, beaten, but her eyes were steady, hard. She looked like her mother in those final months, worn down by the world but not broken. Not yet. Grace turned away from the mirror, sank onto the bed. The mattress was soft, real feathers, not straw. The kind of comfort she'd almost forgotten existed. She wanted to hate it, wanted to hate this room and this house and everything James Whitfield had prepared for her. But she was so tired, so hungry, so done with fighting. Grace lay back on the wedding ring quilt and stared at the ceiling. In St. Louis, her ceiling had been cracked plaster with water stains. Here it was smooth wood, painted white, perfect. She closed her eyes, tried not to think about how easy it would be to stay, to accept this room, this comfort, this life, to forgive James Whitfield for lying, because the alternative was going back to nothing. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, "Don't let the world make you hard, Grace girl. Soft hearts change things." But her mother had died poor, had died in pain, had died leaving Grace alone with nothing but platitudes about soft hearts. Maybe hard hearts survive better. There was a knock on the door. Grace sat up. "Come in." Mrs. Patterson entered carrying a small wooden box. "Mr. Whitfield asked me to give you this, said it belonged to you." She set the box on the bed and left. Grace stared at it, simple pine, unadorned, maybe 8 inches square. She opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was her mother's herb journal. Grace's breath caught. The journal she'd left in her bag in the cabin. The journal that should have been destroyed when the storm hit. The leather cover was water-stained but intact. The pages slightly warped but readable. Her mother's handwriting, her mother's knowledge, her mother's legacy. Underneath the journal was a letter, written in the same careful script as the 47 words that had brought her here. Grace unfolded it with trembling hands. "Grace, I sent 3 men back to Saddleback Canyon the day after we left. The rock slide had buried your bag under 200 pounds of stone. They dug for 2 days. Everything else was destroyed. Your dresses, the dried apples, the cornbread wrapped in your mother's cloth. The storm had soaked through everything. But this journal survived, wrapped in your wool shawl, protected in the center of the bag where the water couldn't reach. Your mother's handwriting, her knowledge, her legacy to you. I know returning this cannot undo the lies I told, cannot heal the trust I broke, but I needed you to have this piece of her back. When you asked if any of those 47 words were real, I told you they were. Every single one was true. Especially, I am honest. I wanted to be honest. Fear made me a liar. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know that meeting you in that canyon was not an accident. It was providence, a chance to see the woman behind the letters, to know that goodness still exists in this world. You are that goodness, Grace Hartwell. I'm sorry I tested it instead of trusting it. James Cole Whitfield. Grace read the letter 3 times. Then she opened the journal to the last page. Her mother's handwriting was shaky here. Written in the final weeks before consumption took her completely. "Grace, my darling girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't cry for me. I lived a full life, even if it was hard. Remember what I taught you. Mugwort for wounds, yarrow for fever, dock root for poison. Details matter. One leaf shape can mean the difference between life and death. But here's what I never told you, what I learned too late. People who've been hurt others, not because they were evil, but because they're scared. Your father hurt me, left when you were born, took my trust with him. I was angry for years, bitter. It poisoned me worse than any herb. But I learned eventually that holding on to that anger only hurt me. That healing required something harder than bitterness. It required choosing to stay soft, to forgive, to believe people could change. You have my healing hands, Grace. Use them not just for bodies, but for broken hearts. Love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing someone real, when they fail you. Especially then. The world will tell you to be hard, to protect yourself, to trust no one. Don't listen. Stay soft. Stay kind. Stay open to second chances. That's how we change things, Grace girl. One soft heart at a time. I love you forever, Mama. Grace closed the journal, pressed it against her chest. Let the tears come. Not sad tears, not angry tears. Something else. Something that felt like release. Her mother had known, had understood, had left her this message knowing Grace would need it someday. People who've been hurt others. James Whitfield had been hurt, badly, by a woman who'd lied and stolen and laughed at his pain. So he'd hurt Grace, not maliciously, not cruelly, but out of fear, out of a desperate need to protect himself from being destroyed again. Grace understood fear, understood the need to protect yourself. She'd spent 7 years protecting herself from men like Mr. Wilson, from a world that saw women alone as prey. But she'd also spent 7 days saving a stranger's life, teaching him about herbs, sharing her last food, lying to protect him even after learning he'd lied to her. Because somewhere under the fear and the anger and the hurt, she was still her mother's daughter, still soft-hearted, still willing to believe people could change. The question was whether James Whitfield could, whether he was worth the risk of forgiving. Grace wiped her eyes, set the journal carefully on the dresser, stood and looked at herself in the mirror again. She still looked exhausted, still looked beaten down, but her eyes weren't hard anymore. They were considering, weighing, deciding. Grace took a breath, made a choice, then as she walked out of the perfect room to find the imperfect man who'd prepared it, the confrontation. Cole was in the barn when Grace found him. He stood beside Copper's stall, brushing the mare's coat with long, methodical strokes. His movements were careful, favoring the injured leg. His shirt was clean now. Someone had brought him fresh clothes, but his face was haggard. He looked up when Grace entered. Hope flickered in his gray eyes, then died when he saw her expression. Grace. We need to talk properly this time, with the whole truth. Cole set down the brush. All right. Not here. Grace glanced toward the barn entrance, where hands were working, pretending not to listen. Somewhere private. There's an office in the house. We won't be disturbed. They walked across the yard in silence. Grace was aware of eyes following them. The whole ranch knew by now. Knew their boss had been testing the mail-order bride. Knew she'd saved him anyway. Knew things were complicated. The office was small but comfortable. A desk covered in ledgers and papers. 2 chairs, a window overlooking the corral. Cole closed the door and stood awkwardly like a man in his own house who didn't know where he belonged. Sit, Grace said. Your leg needs rest. Cole sat. Grace remained standing. She needed the height, needed to feel like she had some control in this conversation. I read the letter, she said, about the journal, about sending men back to the canyon. I'm glad they found it. Your mother's knowledge, her legacy, you should have that. I also read her last entry, the one she wrote before she died. Cole waited. She wrote about forgiveness, about people who've been hurt, hurting others, about choosing to stay soft instead of letting bitterness win. Grace crossed to the window, looked out at the land stretching away. Tell me about Catherine. All of it. Don't leave anything out. She heard Cole take a breath, heard him begin. I met her 3 years ago, 1879. I just lost both parents to fever the year before. The ranch was thriving but empty. I was 30 years old and alone. I wanted a family, someone to build a life with. His voice was steady, factual, like he was reading a report. I placed an advertisement. Rancher seeks wife, must value family and hard work. Catherine Lowell responded. Her letters were beautiful, talked about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing her parents, about wanting a simple life. She was lying. Every word, but I didn't know that. She arrived in Cheyenne on a Tuesday in May. Beautiful, charming, everything I'd hoped for. Cole's voice roughened. Wait, we married a month later. I thought I'd found someone real. Grace turned to look at him, Mom. His face was pale, his hands clenched on the arms of the chair. 6 weeks after the wedding, I opened my safe. $2,000 was gone. So was Catherine. Where did she go? Abilene, Kansas. I tracked her there. Found her in a saloon. Cole closed his eyes. She was sitting on a gambler's wing, a man named Jack Morrison. They were laughing, celebrating. Cards spread across the table. My money stacked in piles. Grace could picture it, could see the moment of realization. The betrayal. When she saw me, she didn't even look ashamed, just smiled, said, "Did you really think I loved you, Hole? You're so dull, so boring. A cowboy who smells like cattle." I was acting, every smile, every kiss, acting. The words came out flat, dead. Like Cole had repeated them so many times in his head, they'd lost their power to hurt. But Grace could see the lie in that, could see the pain etched in every line of his face. Jack the gambler, he laughed, Cole continued, said they'd done it 6 times before. Rich, lonely ranchers were easy marks, desperate to believe someone could love them. Dear God. The worst part, Catherine was already married. To Jack, had been for 5 years. Our marriage was void, meaningless. She'd committed fraud, theft, bigamy. Cole opened his eyes. The law couldn't touch her. She'd been careful. No witnesses to the wedding vows. No legal records she could be held to. By the time I got back to Wyoming with proof, they were gone. Grace sank into the other chair. I'm sorry, that's coal, that's unconscionable. It destroyed me. Not the money, I had plenty, but the trust. The ability to believe anyone could want me for myself. He looked at Grace directly. When your letter came, my first thought was, here we go again. Another woman with a sad story. Another Catherine. But you wrote back. I did, because something about your letter was different. Direct, honest, no flattery, no pretty words. Just this is who I am. This is what I want. Take it or leave it. So you decided to test me. I decided to be careful, to protect myself, to make sure you were real before I risked everything again. Cole leaned forward, and then the rock slide happened, and I woke up and you were there and you didn't know who I was. It seemed like providence, like fate giving me exactly what I needed, a way to see the real you. And what did you see? I saw a woman who shared her last food with a stranger, who climbed a cliff to find medicine for his leg, who stayed up all night tending his fever, who lied to bounty hunters to protect him even after she knew he'd lied to her. Cole's voice broke. I saw someone real, Grace, genuinely, completely real. Everything Catherine pretended to be and never was. Silence fell. Grace looked at this man. This broken, careful, scarred man who'd been hurt so badly he'd forgotten how to trust. I understand why you lied, she said quietly. I understand the fear, the need to protect yourself. I've been hurt too, Cole. Maybe not the same way, but I know what it's like to be used, to be treated like you don't matter. I know. I could see it in your letters, the way you wrote about your mother, about the laundry, about coming here with nothing. But understanding why you lied doesn't make the lying hurt less. I know. Grace stood, walked to the window again. She could see the land, the cattle, the empire this man had built. I came here with 47 words worth of hope. A roof, 4 walls, a place to belong. That's all I wanted, all I asked for. You can have all of that, this room, this house, everything. Can I, or will you, spend the rest of our lives testing me, watching for signs I'm like Catherine, waiting for me to reveal my true nature? The question hung between them. I don't know, Cole admitted. I want to say no, want to say I've learned my lesson. But the fear is still there, Grace. The doubt, the voice that says everyone leaves eventually. Grace turned to face him. Then I need you to leave. Cole's face went white. What? I need you to leave. Go stay with a friend. Go to a hotel in Cheyenne. I don't care where, but leave this ranch for 1 week. Grace, I don't understand. You tested me for 7 days. You get to prove yourself for 7 days. Leave. Give me space. Let me decide if this is a place I can stay. And if you decide it's not, then I'll take the return train ticket you promised in your letter and go back to St. Louis. Start over somewhere else. You'll have nothing. Grace smiled. It was small, sad. I had nothing when I came here. I'll survive. Cole stood, limped toward her, stopped just out of reach. And if you decide to stay, then you come back and we start over. Honest this time, no tests, no lies. Just 2 broken people trying to build something real. That's all I want. Then prove it. Leave. Give me the space to choose you instead of being chosen. Give me the power you took when you decided to test me. Cole studied her face. Grace met his eyes without flinching. 1 week, he said finally. 1 week. And when I come back, we'll see. Cole nodded, turned toward the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, Grace, meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I ruined it. Then he was gone. Grace stood alone in the office and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She'd done it, had taken control, had turned his test back on him. Now she had 7 days to decide if a man who'd lied to protect his heart was worth the risk of opening hers. 1 week later, the 7 days passed slowly. Grace spent them learning the ranch, learning the rhythms of Diamond Star, the way the hands started work before dawn, the way Mrs. Patterson ran the house with quiet efficiency, the way Thomas Dawson managed 30 men and 10,000 cattle with nothing but respect and experience. She helped in the kitchen, learned to cook for ranch hands who could eat their weight in food, discovered she liked the work, liked feeling useful. She walked the property, miles of it, saw the line shacks where hands stayed during roundup, the creeks and pennies that watered the cattle, the distant mountains Cole's grandfather had used as landmarks when claiming this land. It was beautiful, vast, overwhelming, and it could be hers if she wanted it. The hands were respectful but cautious. They'd heard the story by now. Knew she'd saved the boss. Knew he'd lied to her. Knew things were complicated. Jake Bradley, the young rider who'd found them first, was the boldest. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" They were at the barn. Grace was learning to brush down horses, something she'd never done in St. Louis. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Is Mr. Whitfield coming back?" Grace looked at the young man, saw genuine concern in his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Because he's a good pa, fair, pays on time, helped my sister when she got sick last winter, paid for the doctor, didn't take it out of my wages." Tom paused. "He's made mistakes, but he's a good man underneath." "You think I should forgive him?" "I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night. But I also think good men are hard to find, and ones willing to admit when they're wrong are even rarer." Grace considered this. "Did Mr. Whitfield ask you to say this?" "No, ma'am. He's been at the Carson Ranch 30 miles east. Hasn't sent word or messaged anyone. Dawson's been managing everything." Tom went back to brushing his horse. "Just thought you should know. He's keeping his word, giving you space." Grace nodded, went back to her own horse. But Tom's words stayed with her. On day 5, Mrs. Patterson invited Grace to her rooms for tea. "I've been running this house for 20 years, the older woman said, pouring from a delicate china pot. "Knew Mr. Whitfield's parents. Good people, hardworking, honest. Everyone speaks well of them. They raised their son right, taught him values, how to treat people fairly." Mrs. Patterson added sugar to her tea. "But they died before they could teach him how to handle betrayal, how to trust again after being broken." "So you're defending what he did?" "No, I'm explaining it." Mrs. Patterson met Grace's eyes. "That woman, Catherine, she was poison. Charming poison, but poison nonetheless. She took Mr. Whitfield's money and his trust and left him bleeding. He told me." "Did he tell you about the nightmares, the ones that lasted for months after? The way he'd wake up screaming her name?" Mrs. Patterson's voice softened. "Or about how he stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Dawson had to force him to keep running the ranch, or he would have let it all fall apart." Grace set down her teacup. "I didn't know it was that bad. It was worse. I thought we'd lost him. Not to death, but to bitterness, to the kind of hardness that kills a man's soul even while his body keeps moving." "What changed?" "Time, work, and eventually the decision to try again, to place that advertisement, to risk hoping." Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and took Grace's hand. "You changed him, child. Your letters, your honesty, the way you wrote about simple things like you actually meant them. But not enough to trust me without testing. No, not enough for that. Fear is a powerful thing." Mrs. Patterson squeezed Grace's hand. "The question is, can you live with a man who's still learning to trust, who might have bad days, who might need reassurance sometimes that you're real?" Grace pulled her hand back. "I don't know." "That's fair. But while you're deciding, remember this. Mr. Whitfield sent men into a dangerous canyon for 2 days to find your mother's journal. Risked their lives because he knew that book mattered to you. He was trying to make up for lying. He was trying to give you back something precious. There's a difference, Ben." Mrs. Patterson stood. "I'll leave you to think. But Grace, don't let one mistake, even a big one, blind you to everything else. Good men aren't perfect. They're just willing to treat." On day 7, Grace woke before dawn. She dressed in one of the dresses Cole had chosen for her. Simple blue cotton. It fit perfectly. She braided her hair, washed her face, put on the boots Mrs. Patterson had found for her, sturdy leather that didn't pinch. Then she walked out to the creek behind the north pasture and waited. Cole found her an hour after sunrise. He rode in on Copper, dismounted stiffly. His leg was still healing. Probably would be for another few weeks. He looked thinner, tired, like he hadn't slept much. He stopped 10 feet away, didn't come closer. "You asked me to come back," he said. "I'm here." Grace turned to face him. The morning sun was behind her, painting everything gold. Tell me why I should stay. Cole took a breath. Because I love you. The words fell between them, simple, direct, terrifying. You don't know me well enough to love me. Maybe not, but I know enough. I know you're kind when you don't have to be, brave when it would be easier to run, honest even when the truth costs you. Cole took a step forward. I know you gave a stranger your last food, taught him about healing, saved his life, and asked for nothing in return. That stranger lied to me. He did. He was scared and stupid and wrong. But he's here now telling you the truth. He loves you, Grace. Loved you from the moment you handed him the bigger piece of cornbread. Loved you more with every day that passed. Grace felt her throat tighten. Love isn't enough, not without trust. Then I'll earn your trust, however long it takes, however many times I have to prove myself. Cole limped closer. I'll deed half this ranch to you today. Right now, no marriage required. So you'll know you have security whether you stay with me or not. I don't want your ranch. Then what do you want? Grace looked at him. This man who'd been broken and was trying to heal. This man who'd tested her because he was scared. This man who'd sent people into danger to recover her mother's journal. I want the man who wrote those 47 words. The man who promised honesty. The man who said he'd be good to me. I'm still that man. I just lost my way for a while. Can you promise you won't test me again? Won't doubt me every time something goes wrong? Cole was quiet for a long moment. No, I can't promise that. The fear is still there. The doubt. It might always be there. Grace's heart sank. But, Cole continued, I can promise to fight it, to choose trust even when it's hard, to talk to you when I'm scared instead of lying, to be honest about my struggles instead of hiding them. That's not the same as trusting me. No, but it's the truth, and you asked for truth. Cole closed the distance between them. Stopped just out of reach. I'm not perfect, Grace. I'm broken. Still learning how to be the man I want to be. But I'm here. I'm trying. And I'll keep trying for as long as you'll let me. Grace looked into his gray eyes, saw the fear there, the hope, the desperate sincerity of a man who'd learned that pretty words meant nothing without action to back them up. My mother wrote something in her journal, Grace said quietly, about how people who've been hurt others, not because they're evil, but because they're scared. Your mother sounds wise. She was. She also wrote that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about choosing someone real, even when they fail you, especially then. Cole's breath caught. Are you saying, I'm saying I choose you, imperfect, scared, broken you, not because you're rich, not because you own all this. Grace gestured at the land around them. But because in 7 days of lies, I also saw 7 days of someone trying, someone learning, someone capable of change. Grace, but I need you to choose me too, not the woman you tested, not the woman you were afraid of. Me, the real me, with all my rough edges and fears and the fact that I sometimes don't know if I'm being brave or just stubborn. Cole reached out, took her hands in his. I choose you, Grace Hartwell. I choose you every day for the rest of my life, even when I'm difficult, especially then, even when I remind you that you lied to me, even then, though I hope eventually you'll let me live it down. Grace smiled, small at first, then wider. Eventually, maybe, in 20 or 30 years. Cole laughed. It was surprised, relieved. The laugh of a man who'd been holding his breath and could finally exhale. I'll take it, he said. 20 or 30 years of you reminding me I'm an idiot sounds better than one day without you. Grace stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth coming off him, close enough to see the silver starting to thread through his dark hair at the temples. We're going to have to set some rules, she said, whatever you want. First rule, no more lies, no more tests. If you're scared, you tell me. If you're doubting, you tell me. We face it together. Agreed. Second rule, I keep my own money, earn my own way. I don't want to ever wonder if I stayed because I couldn't afford to leave. You can manage the household accounts. Mrs. Patterson's been wanting to retire that duty for years. Third rule, Grace paused. We wait to get married, court properly. Give ourselves time to learn each other without the pressure of vows. Cole's face fell slightly, but he nodded. How long? 3 months? Maybe 6? However long it takes until we both know this is right. Not just convenient or necessary. Right. I can live with that. And last rule. Grace met his eyes. You have to be patient with me too. I'm scared. I've been hurt. I don't trust easily either. So if I'm distant sometimes or guarded or need space, you have to respect that. Always. Grace took a breath, made her final decision. Then yes, I'll stay. I'll try. I'll give us both a chance to build something real. Cole pulled her into his arms, held her like she was something precious, something he'd almost lost and couldn't quite believe he'd gotten back. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for seeing past the lies, for giving me another chance, for being brave enough to stay. Grace wrapped her arms around him, let herself feel safe for the first time in years. Don't make me regret it, she said. I won't. I swear to God, Grace, I won't. They stood together by the creek as the sun climbed higher. Two broken people holding each other up. Two scared people choosing to be brave together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And real Grace was learning was worth more than any amount of pretty lies. 3 months later, the wedding took place on a Tuesday in late September. Not the big affair Cole had originally planned. No 300 guests, no imported flowers or fancy cake. Just the ranch hands, Mrs. Patterson, Thomas Dawson, and a circuit preacher passing through on his way to Cheyenne. Grace wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself with help from Mrs. Patterson. No veil, no train, just clean lines and honest fabric. Cole wore his best suit, the one he'd last worn to his parents' funeral. He'd had it cleaned, pressed, but his hands still shook when he took Grace's. They stood under the cottonwoods by the creek, the same creek where Grace had taught him about mugwort and yarrow, where they'd had their first real conversation after a week of lies. The preacher was brief, asked the important questions, received the important answers. Cole promised to love her, honor her, be honest with her even when it was hard. Grace promised to stay, to trust, to choose him even when doubt crept in. They exchanged simple gold bands, kissed with the ranch hands cheering and Mrs. Patterson dabbing her eyes with her apron. And when it was over, when the papers were signed and the vows were spoken, Grace turned to her husband and said the words she'd been holding back for 3 months. I love you, James Cole Whitfield. Your money, your ranch, your broken pieces, all of it. Cole's eyes went bright. I love you too, Grace Hartwell Whitfield. Just Grace Hartwell, she corrected. I'm keeping my mother's name, both names, so I never forget where I came from or what I'm worth. Grace Hartwell Whitfield. I like that better anyway. The celebration lasted into the evening. Mrs. Patterson had prepared enough food to feed an army. The hands ate and drank and told stories. Jake Bradley played fiddle. Dawson danced with the bride and told her she'd done the impossible, made Cole smile again. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Cole led Grace away from the crowd. They walked to the top of the rise overlooking the ranch. You know what the best part is? Cole asked. What? I almost lost all this because I was too scared to trust, too focused on protecting myself to see what was right in front of me. You didn't lose it. We're here. Because you gave me a second chance. Because you saw past the lies to the man I was trying to be. Cole pulled her close. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me now. Cole laughed. Thank God for that. They stood together, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The land stretched out before them golden in the fading light. 50,000 acres of possibility. But Grace wasn't looking at the land. She was looking at the man beside her. The man who'd tested her because he was broken. Who'd lied because he was scared. Who'd learned slowly and painfully that real love required risk. What are you thinking? Cole asked. About my mother, about what she wrote in that journal. How people who've been hurt hurt others. How healing requires choosing softness instead of hardness. She was right. She usually was. Grace smiled. I think she'd like you. Once she got done lecturing you about lying to her daughter. I look forward to spending the next 50 years earning her approval. 50 year. At least, I plan on being a very old man before I let you go. Grace leaned into him. Let herself imagine it. 50 years on this ranch. 50 years of building something real. Of teaching each other. Of choosing each other even when it was hard. It wouldn't be perfect. They'd have arguments, bad days, moments when old fears crept back in. But they'd also have this. Sunset on a Wyoming ranch. Honest words instead of pretty lies. The simple comfort of being known and chosen anyway. 50 years sounds good, Grace said. Cole kissed the top of her head. Then let's get started. They walked back down the hill hand in hand, toward the house with its white painted rails and lace curtains, toward the party still going in the yard, toward a life neither of them had expected, but both had chosen. Behind them, the last light faded from the sky. Stars began to appear. The same stars Grace's mother had taught her to wish on. Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. Grace used to wish for a home, for a place where she belonged. Now she knew she'd been wishing for this all along. Not a house or land or money, but someone who saw her, who chose her, who stayed even when it was hard. That was worth more than any ranch, more than any amount of gold. It was worth everything.